Hi there, everyone. Welcome. And thank you so much for coming to the McMain Arts Ministries deep dive into art that will enhance your spiritual journey. This is seen with a new perspective with Waverly Matthews. And yes, it is something new. So, Waverly Matthews is the founder and host of the weekly WA-MA, which is short for Waverly Matthews Art Asylum Art Brunch. And he is also the director of the Off-Broadway Gallery at the Pine Street Church, and which is right here just down the street. So Waverly has been hanging the Pine Street galleries for a long time, in addition to 3 or 4 years of his art brunch. So with his background in theology and philosophy and religious studies, Mr. Matthews explores the wisdom of art and spirituality and the great ideas with his art asylum community. And he has weekly classes with his, and also he does an art pilgrimage style tours, and he goes all over. So Waverly holds a Master's of Divinity degree from the Union Presbyterian Seminary and a Master's of Theological Studies from Iliff School of Theology. And there he specialized in the philosophy of aesthetics. So Waverly often describes himself as a missionary for the artist's gospel. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Waverly Matthews.
And Bonnie's going to be turning out the lights here shortly, and hopefully I'll be able to see my notes. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me? Okay. Now, I know some of you might be curious after Bonnie's lovely introduction about how I came to this peculiar mission in life. How many of you have heard of Missionaries for the Artist Gospel? Raise your hand. Nobody, okay. I'm quite unique there. Okay, here's how it happened. I've been to 3 different seminaries, got 2 degrees. My first seminary was in Philadelphia. It was a very, I'd say, conservative, traditional seminary. By that I mean that women were not encouraged to be ordained, and it took a very literal approach to understanding Scripture. Now, I like to say I've been to a conservative, a moderate, and a liberal seminary, so I've got the whole gamut, the whole perspective of theology, so I'm happy about that. But anyway, while I was at this particular seminary in Philadelphia, one of my favorite things to do was on Sunday, the Philadelphia Museum of Art was free. And so I would go, and that's where my real love of art sort of began. Now, at this time, I was simply an admirer of art. I had never taken an art history course. I'd never taken any training on how to look at art, nothing like that. And while I was there at this museum, I saw a sign for a special exhibit coming up. It was a special exhibit of the Barnes Foundation collection. How many of you have seen that? It is one of the greatest collections of Impressionist to Post-Impressionist art in the world. So I bought a ticket, got very excited about it. However, I didn't realize how controversial this was going to be. Anyway, this is the title of my presentation. It's going to be 4 parts, so hopefully you'll be able to join me for all 4. If not, I think it's being recorded. I also record a 9 a.m. version of this and put it up on my YouTube site. So hopefully, either way, if you miss one of these in-person events, you'll be able to see it there. But anyway, I didn't know how controversial this one. It was so controversial, this exhibit at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, that they created a documentary on it called The Art of the Steal. Now, it seems that Dr. Alfred C. Barnes had put in his will that the collection was never to leave his gallery in Marion, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. Yeah, a lot of people have seen it there. He had a very strong distaste, I'll just put it that way, a strong distaste for everybody in the city government, particularly the people who ran the Philadelphia Museum of Art. You can learn all about it in this documentary here. But I, for one, am glad that it actually ended up being shown at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, because I never would have gone and never had my spiritual and philosophical transformation, because that's what it was. You see, that collection was like going to a religious revival for me. I had been saved into some spiritual path that I didn't understand. See, up to that point, I had always thought that revelation came through something written, the written word. But this message was coming to me visually. And I was transformed by it, but I just simply didn't understand exactly what had happened to me. Hence, I went back and studied aesthetics later on. By the way, I'm happy to be leading a group of pilgrims in March on an art pilgrimage to Philadelphia and D.C., and this is going to be one of our stops. So if any of you have questions about that interest, let me know. Okay, the Foundation's website states that our founder, Dr. Albert C. Barnes, believed that art had the power to improve minds and transform lives. Yeah, no kidding. I now knew that art was much more than decoration. It was much more than a financial asset. It was much more than some sort of prestigious image that you could hang on your wall and brag about. Art was a conduit for big ideas, spiritual ideas. It was also a portal for an experience of spiritual transcendence. How many of you agree with that? Good, I'm glad to hear that. I was blown away by the Renoirs I saw, blown away by the Monets I saw, even Henri Matisse works, like you see here, in a good way impacted me, troubled me, disturbed me, expanded me in a way. Now, as you know, Matisse is not a literalist when it comes to depicting his subjects. He paints his subjects in sort of a rough, crude, simplistic way, and he seemingly uses arbitrary colors. So how did non-literal art like this have such a profound effect on me? Remember, I was a religious traditionalist at that point, a literalist. So I thought to myself after this exhibit, seeing all this work, could visual art possibly be as revelatory as Scripture, and without requiring a literal understanding of it? Well, that exhibit taught me a great truth about art, that artists must often lie in order to tell the truth. I'll repeat that. Artists must often lie in order to tell the truth. Now, obviously, for Matisse, it's the feeling one has when looking at his works, the experience one has when looking at his works. That is what's important, not what the actual subject that he created looked like historically. That's not important. So maybe, I reflected, maybe if I stopped trying to look at life so literally, that maybe I could expand my understanding of life. Maybe I could become a little wiser. Here's how I see things today. Allow me to use an arboreal analogy. Truths of any faith or spiritual or philosophical tradition are like a fruit-bearing tree, like the tree in this Barnes Foundation painting. The original seed that created these traditions, these fruit-bearing trees, was the founder of that spiritual, religious, philosophical tradition. But that's not necessarily the important thing. The tree itself might just be more important. The quality of its fruit, the pleasure it brings to our eyes, the type of experience it offers. This is what really matters. That may sound a little radical to some of you. I hope not, but if it does, stick with me. When I was in seminary, I also learned about something called the quest for the historical Jesus. How many of you have heard of that? All right. A group of academics thought if they could just discover the facts about the historical founder of the Christian faith, then they would be able to offer the true version of the faith. Now, what ultimately happened with these academics wrestling over what the history was is they all produced a different Jesus, one that conformed to their own idiosyncratic values and beliefs. Okay, that's what happened. Now, I do believe that the quest for the historical Jesus has some value, and, for helping us understand the historical tradition, the religious tradition. But for me, though, it's almost like going to a tree and hacking at its roots with an axe, trying to find the original seed that produced it. Is that truly what is important? Maybe our time would be better spent focused on the tree itself, asking questions like, is it fully healthy? Do all the branches produce good fruit? Are some of the branches dying and need pruning? Is the tree's beauty even worth our attention? Do we have, this is the most important question, do we have a role in nurturing that tree to become more fruitful, more beautiful? All right? This is how art had transformed my perception of truth. My experience of art led me to focus more on the tree of my own spiritual and philosophical traditions, rather than spend all my time trying to find the historical seed from which they sprouted. Now, caveat again, there is value in studying the history of founders, I believe that, but I'm not going to go throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I do think our time should be spent more on focusing what is present with us today, what that tradition has become. And that all leads me to nativity sets. How about that for a segue? Right after Thanksgiving, the most exciting time for me is when my mom would get out the nativity set. Now, she actually made this nativity set. And she sent me this photograph yesterday of it, hence the quality of it. This is not an artistic photo, obviously. And we would set it out on my great-grandfather's table that he had made by hand, too. So a lot of tradition involved with that. Now we have the typical scene here. Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus dead center here. We have the wise men on the left. We have the shepherds on the right. We have the ox and the donkey. And of course, we have some camels as well. Some nativities don't have camels at all. Now, when I was young, I liked to imagine myself as one of the characters. You know, when you play with dolls, I would actually get up and grab one of the shepherds and do. And I would do stuff there. But I have to admit, when I became a teenager, I lost my felicity for creative imagination. I don't know how many of you can relate to that. That's really a shame. Well, I hope we can recover some of that today and throughout this series. Now, this is the earliest nativity that we know of. It comes from the 4th century. It's from a sarcophagus. Only the baby Jesus is present, along with the donkey and the ox. There are a couple of birds bookending the scene. My guess is they might represent the flight of the soul, the spirit afterwards. I haven't done an in-depth study on this, so I apologize. But here is where we started, and here is where we are today. Do you think artists have increased in their ability to render this? I don't know. One thing I didn't realize when I was young is that most nativity scenes are like this one. They're lying to me. If I really wanted the literal truth, the shepherds and wise men were not there at the same time. And many nativity sets present the wise men as kings. Well, that's not in the scripture at all. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke never mentioned a stable or a cave. Can you believe it? And that's where most nativity scenes take place. And there's no mention in these texts, no mention of an ox and a donkey. And yet they were in the earliest depictions of the nativity. So lies. All lies. Now, after decades of pondering these things, deep reflection, after my dramatic experience at the Barnes Foundation collection, I think I've wisened up a bit to images like this. Perhaps the artists who created the first nativity scenes had to lie in order to tell a greater truth about this particular spiritual path. Such artistic license in nativity scenes conveys a greater truth about this story than any attempt at a literal, historical, accurate reconstruction. And that brings me to our famous nativity scene. And the first time I saw it was here. Now, one thing that gets me really excited is when I can finally go see in person an artwork that I've admired in picture books for a long time. And that's what I was able to do 2.5 years ago at the National Gallery in London when I stood across from this painting. Now, at first you might recognize some of the details in this because they've been on greeting cards, coffee mugs, ornaments, and the like. But when you see this whole work and really take time to see it, you notice how strange it is. Mystic Nativity, as it is called, is by the Renaissance great Sandro Botticelli. He almost certainly did not give this work that title. And here's something else that's very interesting about it. It is the only surviving work of Botticelli's that he signed. That's interesting. Obviously, this work had great personal significance for him. Another interesting thing, he also painted this on canvas, not the typical wooden panels of all of his other paintings. What can you do with canvas? Roll it up and hide it. Most likely this was his own private devotional work. So it leaves me wondering, what secrets does it hold that he did not want exposed to the public eye? When most of you hear the name Sandro Botticelli, you don't think of this work. You might think of this work. The Birth of Venus is one of the most prized artworks in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy. I'd like you to take a moment with this work and just notice the style, Botticelli's style when he painted this in 1485. When you hear the name Botticelli, you might also think of this work. It's basically across the room from the other work, if any of you have ever been to the Uffizi. It also features Venus, along with other figures from classical Greek and Roman mythology. So Botticelli, for the first half of his career, created a lot of art inspired by humanism. Most of you are familiar with Renaissance humanism, the celebration of the classical world and its capacity to inspire human flourishing, its exaltation of the ideals of beauty and form. Now, this may also come as a surprise. After his death, Botticelli was essentially forgotten for 300 years. Including his Venuses. The only people who continued to pay any attention to Botticelli were art historians in an academic setting. Ironically, it was this work, this nativity scene, that brought about a rediscovery, a rebirth of Botticelli, and also of his Venuses. An English collector, William Fuller Maitland, at sometime during the middle of the 19th century, he purchased it. And in 1857, he loaned it to an art treasures exhibition in Manchester, England. Around 1.3 million people, the most that had ever seen an exhibit in England, saw this work. And it was a major hit. Botticelli had been reborn from a nativity scene. And he caused a British invasion, 100 years before the Beatles. A British invasion of Florence, Italy. Also caused the rebirth of the Birth of Venus. Now, in 1878, the National Gallery of London purchased this, and it has been one of the highlights of that collection ever since. Well, now that you've also seen Primavera and the Birth of Venus, I want you to notice Botticelli's style in this work. It's a little different, isn't it? It looks like it might be indebted to works like this, an Orthodox nativity. Here, too, we have a golden sky with angels. We have the same less literal depiction of people. And this is not a celebration of beauty, but of spiritual ideas through rich symbolism. So what caused Botticelli's style to change? From a celebration of the ideal of beauty to works less detailed and full of symbolism. Well, it turns out it was most likely a religious conversion inspired by the preaching of this man, Girolamo Savonarola. How many of you have heard of him? Anybody with a Catholic background? Anybody? All right. For most people in the art world, he is a bad guy. But in the Catholic Church, he's not so bad. He's a bad guy. I don't want to hit on him too hard here. Savonarola took Florence by storm in the last decade of the 15th century. He preached of the coming apocalypse, where Florence would experience the wrath of God unless they repented of their sinful ways. Now, it's very likely Sandro and his brother were caught up in this religious fervor. Savonarola called for the famous or infamous Bonfire of the Vanities, in which people would burn in the city square all of their luxuries, their fine jewelry, fine silks and furs, mirrors, other luxuries, along with, listen to this, along with their pagan artworks. And Botticelli may have burned some of his own artworks at this time. And here's why some scholars believe that he actually did. Besides portraiture, there is not a single Botticelli painting with non-Christian subject after the Birth of Venus in 1485. Well, except maybe this one. Titled Calumny of Apelles. It was painted 10 years, though, later. However, this work has very Christian themes in it. I've given a presentation on this before. I can talk to you about it later. I'm not going to do so much now. But it does have Christian themes, and it was in the possession of a private dealer during the Bonfire of the Vanities. So basically, if you set this aside, nothing non-religious after 1485, after the Birth of Venus. That seems a bit odd, don't you think, since he made a lot of money on those non-religious works. Well, let's return to Botticelli's Mystic Nativity. We're going to divide it into sections to get a better sense of it. But before that, I want you to take another good minute with it, to linger over it, and note anything about it that grabs your attention. It's hard to tell if they're embracing or wrestling, isn't it?
I think the bright colors.
Yeah, the colors are so good. There's a lot of writing at the very, very top.
Yep. And I'm going to address that in a second here.
And the top of April looks more like
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
They don't look like typical angels.
well, the angels are embracing it.
Oh, on top of the.
They're down in the human beings.
They're all over the place, aren't they? Angels everywhere. This is an explosion of angels almost.
One angel, one human.
Yeah.
It's noisy. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't mean like visually, I mean, if you were there, there's noise going on.
Yeah, yeah, and it requires also a lot of attention. There is a lot going on. It is noisy visually, too.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's zoom in here. Top of the painting, swirling angels and a Greek inscription brought up here. Once we know the meaning of this inscription, things get even weirder. So let's look at it. Here's the translation. This painting at the end of the year 1500, in the troubles of Italy, I, Alessandro, that's Sandro's real name, in the half-time after the time, painted, according to the 11th chapter of St. John, that's a reference to the book of Revelation, in the second woe of the apocalypse, during the release of the devil for 3.5 years. Then he shall be bound in the 12th chapter, and we shall see him buried, as in this picture. Well, that doesn't sound very Christmassy. What is Botticelli referring to? Well, it's based on a sermon text preached by Savonarola. And it's also a reference to the widespread belief in all of Renaissance Europe that the year 1500 would usher in the end times, the time of the apocalypse. Now, the angels on the roof, those three angels there, they represent faith, hope, and charity, reading left to right. Faith, hope, and charity, and they're in their corresponding white, red, and green. The 12 dancing angels at the top, they hold olive branches from which ribbons with inscriptions are present. I don't know if you can read. Can you tell that there's writing on those ribbons? Well, how about now? You see them vaguely? And from the ribbons, yes, golden crowns. Now notice the faint writing. Infrared reflectography has revealed that these ribbons originally bore the 12 virtues of the Virgin Mary, also from the sermon of Savonarola. I think he had a little bit of an impact on Botticelli. Some of the inscriptions, attributes of the Virgin, include Mother of God, Bride of God, Sole Queen of the World, Sanctuary beyond words, Virgin of Virgins, Wondrous Bride of God the Father, Virgin Mother, Hope of Sinners, and Queen over all. Now, I often ask myself, have Protestants, or any non-Catholic for that matter, missed out a little bit by not having symbols of the archetypal feminine in our tradition, sort of like Mary, the Mother of God, or even Mary Magdalene? Have we missed out? Just a question. Let's go to the bottom half. We see the central figures of Mary, Joseph, and the Christ child, along with the wise men on the left and the shepherds on the right. Notice how oversized Mary and the baby Jesus are. Let's zoom in even further on them. I don't think there's anyone in this work besides Mary who would have the strength to lift up that bambino. The Italians love their chubby babies. Yeah, they love their chubby babies. What is Botticelli telling us by making them inordinately large? He's saying that they are very significant, right? They are very important, very significant. We need to pay attention to them. Now, Joseph's in an odd posture. Looks like he's asleep. I'm going to discuss these three, but I'm going to discuss them at a future art brunch. Hopefully that'll entice you to return.
He also looks a lot older than we typically imagine him.
Yeah.
We usually imagine him.
Oh, yeah. In the Protestant church, there isn't this age difference, but in the Catholic tradition, there is.
How big is the original painting?
The original painting, I don't know if Sawyer, you remember this. It's not big at all.
Like that much detail?
Yeah. Not very large. I almost walked by it. I was looking for it, and I almost walked right by it. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a cave there. We have a cave. Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, the cave was put in as a symbol. Shouldn't get ahead of myself here. All right, I'll go ahead and give you just one tidbit here. It's a harbinger of his eventual death and being buried in a cave. So most nativities have some kind of clue that he's going to die. in his birth scenes, okay? But I wanted to show you all this. As you can tell, this is not the same Botticelli who painted the Primavera and the birth of Venus. Let's zoom back out a little. Notice the angels and how they are interacting with the other characters.
Who's that creepy little guy down in the corner?
Oh, I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. The angels, look at how they're interacting. They've placed olive wreaths on the heads of the wise men and of the shepherds and of the men down there that they're embracing or wrestling. I think in the context, it's most likely rescuing. All right? The theme, though, is peace on earth. Peace is being brought, reconciliation between celestial and earthly beings. In other words, spiritual alienation is about to end as a result of this. Now, on to this weird part. 3 angels embracing mortal men. There's scrolls there too that proclaim in Latin, peace on earth, goodwill among men. What's happening is actually the angels are pulling the men out of a state of religious limbo. They are saving them from being pulled under the earth by these guys. Demons. And these demons now are scurrying away. Yeah. They're scurrying away. So the overall message of this work emphasizes the coming of Christ and the hope that this event and his return during the end times are going to bring an era of peace. So there are 2 nativity stories in this painting. The birth of Jesus into the world and the rebirth of Jesus when he returns during the apocalypse, during the end times. Now, in the spirit of Art Brunch, I'm going to focus in on the shepherds. First of all, I'm going to show you this work. This is a triptych in the Uffizi. It's just around the corner from the birth of Venus and the Primavera. And here's what it really looks like up close. It's known as the Portinari altarpiece by Flemish artist Hugo van der Goes. This nativity doesn't include the Magi, but it does include the shepherds, and it's those people I'm going to focus on today. Now, if you're an Advent purist, I know the shepherds come about on the 3rd Sunday of Advent. I'm going to take artistic license and present them now and see if they can help us gain a little bit more hope during these fearful times since COVID and political things. I'll stop there. All right. Botticelli would have had access to this work. It was in Florence, even though it's presented by a Flemish artist. Notice how he has created a work that's much more finished. Flemish artists were very good at that. All right? So unlike in the Mystic Nativity, things are more finished, less two-dimensional, and everything is painted to scale in this work as well. And Jesus is not the rotund bambino. He's skinny. Most babies aren't, when they're first born. When they're first born, they're not. All right? But I am going to focus on the shepherds in this work. I'm going to use that to wrap things up. So we stress hope now. The shepherds are going to help us explore this idea of hope for us personally this morning. Notice how van der Goes, the artist, has depicted them. He's really emphasized their humble state, socioeconomically and that sort of thing, culturally. This is a humble class of people. I'd like to really focus in on that shepherd to the far right. I mean, look at him. Obviously, his parents could not afford orthodontists or regular trips to the dentist. The point is that the good news is for everyone, including the lowest class in society. Now, behind his shoulder is the moment when the angel visits the shepherds and tells them of this wondrous birth of their future deliverer. So in their fear, a message of hope and peace comes. It's all contained in this one work. Now I'm going to show you another work that was in Florence at the time Botticelli painted his work that he definitely knew about. It's by Domenico Ghirlandaio. Again, if we focus on the shepherds on the right, he's painted them in great detail like the Flemish artist, but he's also softened up their appearance compared to Van der Gogh's. They're a little bit more respectable, presentable. All right? At least he's been kind enough not to reveal their teeth. Let's be honest, the shepherds, as far as agency in the world, they're more like us, just regular folks. Botticelli seems to have split the difference between Ghirlandaio's shepherds and Van der Gogh's. His shepherds are rendered simplistically, in a less polished way. Their shoeless feet, sort of that's the only witness to their poverty and humble status. So it's time for me to ask you some deep questions here. When in your life have you been like a shepherd? Where you have been humbled, maybe by circumstances when you were younger, maybe a circumstance when you were an adult. Something happened that humbled you, where you did not feel like you had power, that you had agency. A moment when you felt less capable. Think about that. Some of you look like you are of retirement age. I know retirement brings a sense of that sometimes as well. Just reflect on that a moment. I'd like to invite all of us to become kids again, and to wake up our imaginations, to become as powerful in our imaginations as we were when we were 6 or 7 or 8. And I want us to become one of those shepherds. Okay? And to do that, we're going to practice Ignatian contemplation. Now, some of you are familiar with Visio Divina, which is contemplative viewing of artwork, and that's what this is. Bonnie and Bill and Sawyer, can you pass these around? This is a detailed description of the Ignatian contemplation. Sometimes it's called imaginative prayer. This is simply for your reference. Let me do that. Bonnie, I think we're good to go. I think these two are going to do it. Hand these out. So in Ignatian contemplation, we prepare through doing deep breathing and seeking guidance. And then we experience contemplation by entering the scene. The third aspect is application. That's when we interact with the scene. Colloquy is when we ask and listen. Some of you like to pray. This would be the time to pray. Or just ask yourself questions. And then we reflect, we journal about our experience. Does everybody have one now? All right. You don't have to look at the details of this because I'm going to go ahead and guide you through it right now. So let's go back. Here we go. First of all, sit comfortably. Don't slouch over. Sit comfortably, maybe straight. The straighter your spine is, the better. And take some deep breaths. It's going to come back in a second. Take some deep breaths. Relax. Let go of any distractions. Set aside any stress or worries. You can take care of them later, not now. If you're a religious person, ask God for guidance. Ask a spirit to come right now into your mind and your heart and allow you to be open. Now we're going to enter the scene. Look at the painting. Slowly use your eyes to go over all of the painting. Notice any details that stick out. And imagine that you are physically present. This is where it gets hard for adults. Try to be physically present. What do you smell? Remember, there are barnyard animals there. Can you taste something in the air? What do you feel? And certainly, what do you see? From the perspective of the shepherds. Again, what details now are sticking out to you? What is catching your eye? What are you focusing on? And what emotions are rising within you? Now notice what the other characters are doing. What action is taking place that you as a shepherd are observing? Notice what you're feeling. Notice thoughts that arise. Take note of them if you'd like. Now it's time to be still again and listen. Listen internally. Is some spirit seeking to communicate anything to you about this work? Feel free now to ask questions of that spirit. Now here's where it's nice to have paper and pen. I always recommend people have a journal. When you go to an art museum, don't go empty-handed. Have some note-taking device with you. It's time where we journal, we reflect. When we write something down, it is a message to our unconscious that this is important. This is significant. Tuck this away somewhere. I might need it later. I might need it now. You know? All right, well, I want to be respectful of your time, so thank you very much. And hopefully I'll see you next Sunday, okay?